morning, Thrive. It is great to be back together with all of you. The Bernard family was doing something last weekend that if you would have asked me a number of years ago, I would have been like, oh, that's just way out in the future. I don't have to pay attention to that. We were doing college visits. Yes, that's exactly how I felt. It was a great experience, emotional, and then it was like, all I could see was double dollar signs because we have the twins, so it was like a whole range of emotions going off all at once. But we had a great trip. It was good to just kind of just hang out together. I heard some amazing things from Jeremiah, who was here last Sunday, giving the message, talking about sarcasm. Not that any of you needed that. But it's part of our series that we've been in that's been a challenge over the last few weeks. And it's a challenge because it's all targeting the words that we say, the things that we have that come out of our mouths are a reflection of something much deeper. Our words really reflect what's happening in our hearts. And as we jump into the last Sunday, we're going to kind of hit one that actually has a little bit of a deeper place that it goes along the way. And to kind of start off this morning, there's a TV show that you may have seen, that you may have watched. It's been around for a while, and it's fascinating because it sets up hypothetical scenarios with actors. They put them out into like the real world so that they can kind of act it out and see if people would actually respond appropriately in those situations. It's called What Would You Do? Anybody ever see this television program? It's a fascinating experience to watch because you sit there, and I don't know if you're like me, but you're like, oh, yeah, I would totally jump in on that. Oh, I would totally say something. And yet, it's interesting to see how people react in those moments. So they create these two actors, like examples. They'll say, kids wreaking havoc on a store while mom just ignores it. You know, not that anybody's ever seen that. Not that some of us have ever had that happen in our lives. But they go, what would you do if a kid was just terrorizing a store causing problems? In that moment, how would you respond? A man who speaks hate to a person of another race. Now, mind you, these are actors in a coffee shop, in a restaurant. Something's going on. They're acting, the two people that are playing this out. But everybody else is watching, thinking this is actually a real experience. Someone who's clearly intoxicated, leaving a bar, and is going to try to get the keys to drive home. What would you do in that moment? Bullying, there are so many different examples, all intended to see how will people respond. The people that are observing and watching from the outside, what would they do in that moment if they observed these situations along the way? Now, of course, they highlight the people that do get involved, that do speak up. Some people get really upset and they got to move in fast because things might get ugly. But a lot of the times, they'll also show people that notice what's happening, but choose not to do anything. They just kind of sit back and they don't engage with what's going on. They may comment to the person that they're with, observing what's happening over here, but they don't choose to step in and say anything or try to stop the situation that's happening because most people just don't want to get involved. There's actually a term for this. Some social psychologists coined a phrase back in the 1960s. It's actually called the bystander effect. It's an actual thing. Back in the 1960s, there was a really heinous crime that was committed in a city back on the East Coast. And what was tragic about it was that while this thing was going on, the person who was perpetrating this did something. People heard. That person left. Nobody responded. That person came back, did some more things. People heard what was going on, but nobody stepped in and could have prevented this terrible thing that was going on. And so these two people, John Darley and Bibb Latané, that is a name right there. Bibb Latané, coined this phrase because they examined it. It wasn't just an isolated incident. There's many times in our lives and in situations when we become bystanders. And we're not wanting to engage, step in, to try to make a difference to a situation that we really could make an impact on. And the effect really has a dangerous kind of impact on people's lives. And if we're not careful, this isn't just an emergency situation like these two psychologists experienced. This is something that can impact our lives every day. It can impact us when we go to work, the places that we frequent, our homes, personally, professionally, when we act like, you know what, we don't care. When we just kind of portray an attitude that says, I don't want to get involved, I'm too tired to take an action that may be necessary to take, or I don't feel like I'm compelled to actually move in to try to help a situation. It's like we all just want to say, whatever. You guys remember that back in the day? Whatever. Anybody actually, you were willing to admit you did that, okay? Whatever. So here's what I want to do. I want to get everybody moving and loose today a little bit, okay? So I want you to make your best W, and I want you to give me your best whatever that you would have done, like the verbiage, like whatever. Like some of you could go that. We were in Southern California, and there was some people down there that could have done that really well. So I want, on the count of 3, okay? I want you to give me a whatever. Please participate. I do have a microphone. I'm just saying, on the count of 3, I want to hear it, okay? 1, 2, 3. Ooh, there was a good one. Somebody jumped. They were like, whatever. I love it. But that is an attitude that actually works its way into our lives and comes out of our mouths. It's not just some sort of symbol that's there that we kind of throw out. It's a way of thinking. It's an attitude that says, I don't care about what's going on in this moment. And it works its way into our words. See, when we say whatever to people in our lives, we do it sometimes with going, I'm not interested, I'm not involved, this doesn't matter to me. Sometimes we do it with our silence, which is actually communicating without words, but it says a lot. See, on the surface, we try to send this message when things happen in our lives that we don't care, it's not that big of a deal. But if we're really honest, and if we really cut to the truth and got under the surface of it all, a lot of the times when we try to say whatever, we really do care. And it really does matter. And it really is important to us. But we're trying to do something to ourselves. We're trying to protect where we're at because of something that's going on that really does matter and it really does hurt. But when I throw that whatever out there, all of a sudden it's me trying to put up this big wall of protection so that I don't continually get hurt. Again, the problem is that it's a very dangerous place to live your life. Because when you say you don't care, especially with your words, you're isolating yourselves from the very thing that God says we need. People and relationships that bring life and connection and purpose. I want you to get this today because this is what's so important with our series, Throwing Shade. Our words, when we intend them to wound and to hurt, actually isolate us from the very thing that God says that you desperately need and I desperately need in our lives, and that is to be connected to people that bring life and bring joy and to bring purpose. That's what relationships are for. And if we don't understand what our words can do to either bring life to those relationships, but too often we throw shade, and especially when we say, whatever, I really don't care. In reality, I do. But I'm setting you at odds against me at that moment. We can't bridge that relational gap because of some reason that I feel the need to protect myself and where I am at. See, the way we talk to one another really shapes then the depths of relationships that we have. And when this attitude starts to creep in, and it creeps in ever so slowly, that leads us to this place where we're just kind of bystanders to relationships where we just don't want to put any effort into it anymore. I just don't really want to invest into this really anymore because we've been burned, we've been hurt, we've struggled, we've been wounded enough, so I'm just going to be like, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. And we say that on the outside, but underneath, it really is a much bigger deal than we realize. Which is what God is wanting to do to change into us, because here's the struggle that happens. When we say whatever, it slowly begins to harden, your heart. Over time, you just become more immune to things that really should just move you in a way, that should kind of work in you in some way. And so when our world is full of hard-hearted people that struggle and just cause havoc wherever they go, and yet God is wanting to do something, especially in people that are willing to trust Him, follow Him, listen to Him, to make sure your heart is in a place every single week throughout the series, that your heart is in a place where it is able to bring life out into the world through the words and to the people that you have. And when you say whatever, you're actually closing it off where it begins to atrophy and it begins to get tough. And the compassion that God so longs for you to exhibit in your life gets lost. So when you actually say whatever, you lose, and the people in your life also lose. And there's a danger that we have to recognize that's going on here. And the awareness of what's happening matters, which is why each one of these weeks throughout our series that we've been in, which have been powerful. Week 1, we talked about talking trash, the way we insult other people. Week 2 was about gossip. If you have not seen the message, I want to challenge you, go to thrivechurchsay.com. You can actually view the message on there. Our video team's doing a great job of getting stuff up to actually watch the messages. So thank you to our team. I love what they're doing there. I challenge you to watch it because we all gossip a lot more than we think. And it's way more damaging than we realize. Last weekend with sarcasm, I know it can be funny sometimes, but it really cuts in some places that are hard. And this week, this attitude, we need to change it up. Could be one of the most dangerous things in our lives, actually, when we say whatever, and I don't care. But God wants to actually break up our hearts today. He wants to make sure that they are ready for Him to be able to move in and change and work something so that the words that come out, actually when we are hurt and we are in pain, it's okay. We don't just say, I don't care. We actually don't become bystanders. We are willing to step into situations because the relationships and the people in our lives matter that much. I'm going to take it to another step. The world needs followers of Jesus that are willing to go against just saying things to hurt, but instead say things to breathe life and to heal. The world needs us. And so if you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, we're going to be going to the Word. You'll be excited about this. If you're not and you're just kind of exploring the God thing, you're trying to discover what this is all about, the beauty of what we're talking about today, it is incredibly practical, and you will get something out of this. So you'll be able to understand more of what's going on, and you'll also hear what God can bring to our lives that will actually change your heart in a way that nothing, no one, anywhere can, but only Him. So thrive. Let's open our Bibles. And just, as an aside, I cannot wait for the next series that we're about to go into. A lot of us know a lot about the Bible, but we don't know deeply what it can mean to our lives. So I want you to be here. This Binge Reading the Bible series, you got to come. There's some great weeks that we're going to talk through a bunch of different things. Please give this away. Diane did a great job of going, who's your one? Use it, give it away. Thrive, we're going to the book of Proverbs today as a part of our series. Proverbs 25:15 is the passage that we're going to be in. I want to encourage you, look it up in your app, open your Bible, follow along. It'll be on the screen if you don't have any of those things. But this is what it says. Patient persistence pierces through indifference. Gentle speech breaks down rigid defenses. It's an interesting first phrase that kind of highlights this incredible truth from God that really talks about the danger that can come that we see in this whatever attitude, and it shows up in that word indifference. When I'm indifferent to something, I try to convey that I just don't really care, like we've talked about. It's when we throw out the whatever that goes on, but it really reflects apathy in my life. Apathy, this sense that I just don't care what happens. We become numb. We go on autopilot. We sort of coast through a relationship that we have. So to help us understand and define exactly what this whatever attitude really is, whatever is an apathetic attitude towards another. It's an apathetic attitude towards another, where I try to say, I don't care what's going on with you. That's what we're trying to say. This is what it defines as, this isn't really what's going on, but this is what we're saying is going on. I've got this attitude that says, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction. I'm not going to give you the time of day. You're not really affecting me right now. Quite frankly, I'm not even trying to think about you in this moment. You ever feel that way towards somebody? We all have. At times, you may have felt that in a marriage. You may have felt that way towards someone in your family. You may have felt that way towards someone in your workplace. You may have someone that is in your sphere of life that you get towards where you get to this place of going, you know what? I've just got this apathy regarding this relationship. See, the trouble with apathy, though, is that it moves beyond hurt and moves beyond arguing. It moves beyond struggle to an even darker place. We don't see it that way. We don't think of it in those terms because we just think, well, I just don't really care about them in this moment. But in reality, it's telling us that we don't feel anymore. I don't feel anything towards this person. I don't feel anything towards this situation that I'm going through in our lives, and our words reflect it. We don't care. We don't offer compassion. We don't engage in communication. We're not invested in the situation, and our conversations become just sort of plain vanilla. So there's no arguments, there's no sharing of feelings, there's no sharing of dreams, there's no dialogue, there's not even any debate, just mundane, robotic conversations take place, kind of like you're talking to a stranger on the plane. Did you see the weather today? Hey, did you see the game last night? We kind of go into these things, we just kind of give a factual rundown of what's going on in our lives, and we kind of go into this place where we have this attitude saying whatever comes through, we don't realize it. But that attitude actually infects other relationships in our lives. We don't realize that. We just think it's isolated because this person brings this out in me. This situation brings this out in me, when in reality, it leaks everywhere we go. Because remember, our words are coming from where? Our hearts. So if I've got this attitude that's growing in my heart, that it's getting bigger, getting stronger because I just try to protect because of something that's going on, guess what? That protection doesn't just stay with this. It's there permanently. If we are not mindful of it, it impacts all the different places that we go through. I've seen it in my own life. When things are going on in ministry in a certain situation, and it's not going the way that I like or the way that it should, and it's kind of just like, well, I'm not sure, it's not really going anywhere, it spills over into my home. You ever been there? Situations that happen in one place have an impact on another, which is why this is so dangerous. Because again, it's back to being a heart issue in our lives. See, when you get to this place, you don't really put anything into the relationship anymore. And if you're not putting anything into the relationship, then is the relationship going to grow, develop, have any kind of life to it? Or will it slowly just wither and die? And that's too often what happens in this situation. You just don't care about what anybody else says, what they're saying to you. You just don't not even sure what to say or think anymore. I had a friend that we actually worked with on staff together at a church years ago. And there was sort of a difficult situation that had come up with the boss that we had worked for. And this friend of mine just kind of became just the brunt of just couldn't do anything right, always made mistakes, and that was what was highlighted constantly from his boss. And so that was literally what was spotlighted, and it became so much so that it was just relentless. And it continually hit him time and time and time and time and time again. So my friend just went into this place where he sort of shut down. And he was trying to, again, keep it isolated to just one part of his life. And yet, it's hard, especially in ministry, to just kind of check out of one relationship, especially with somebody that's above you, that's on staff at a church, and not have it impact the people around you. And he literally starts losing weight. He starts just really becoming depressed in the situation because he literally let this attitude take over his life. Now, what was happening to him was not his fault and was not his choice. And yet what his choice was how he responded to it. His heart became so hard in the process. It became so tough that nothing would really cut through. Even a relationship with people that he cared about, he no longer was able to truly engage and love and be with them because that's the damage that this what other apathetic attitude can have in our lives. And I'm telling you, imagine some of you have this person or some struggles in your life with someone that this comes out where you think you're trying to be protective And yet it is so damaging, more than we know, because it's so much deeper than we know. So let's dig in a little bit and go, okay, what was kind of what's underneath that? What causes this place of the apathy that we go to in our lives? And there's a few things that I just want to highlight because this will give you the clues to look for. Because your words will reflect and reveal. Remember, they're a temperature gauge, really, to kind of tell you what's going on in your life. And if you hear some of the things coming out of your mouth, like, I just don't care, red flag goes up. And some of these things will help you get there. The first one is skepticism. Skepticism. If you become highly skeptical about life, I know last week cynicism kind of came out a little bit, did it not? So you start kind of getting this place where you're skeptical about things that are happening. You're on a path that will help you go towards being apathetic towards things. The situation won't change. It's not going to get any better. If you ever say this phrase, it is what it is. Sometimes it works, but when it comes to relationships, that's not a good place. So you have to start paying attention to the words that we use that will reveal to you what's going on deep inside. I told you about when we were transitioning Thrive years ago. We were at this church, or we were transitioning this church that was leading to Thrive. There was a place where we got a season that there was zero traction. We were going nowhere, and we were just kind of stuck in the mud, and the wheels were spinning. And I became highly skeptical at the time, going, you know what? This will never work. We might as well just cut bait and move on. This is terrible. This is not going to happen. Like, this is awful. And I just was kind of like, why put anything into this? Why try to do anything about this? You know what's hard about skepticism? We put ourselves in a place of going, you know what, God, I know better than you do. And I can see what you can't. So we should just move on from this. If we would have, we're not here today. But that's the place that apathy can take you to. I'm going to tell you about the result of apathy in a minute. Second one, though, is overstimulation. This is a big one in our culture today. We become so desensitized because we are so overstimulated by things in our lives. We are so used to seeing so many things that are horrific, tragic, at the expense of other people, that we are just so overstimulated, we just don't see it for what it is anymore. What's the number one response that happens now when you see something happening, even tragic? What's the number one thing that people do? Let me get this on video. This is great. What are you talking about? There's two people beating their brains in. Why are you videoing this? But isn't that what happens? We all have this thing. You see people slowing down on the roads. We traveled a lot these last few times. There's accidents happening. What do? We slow down so we can see what's going on. We have this sense of going, we're so overstimulated to think we don't even get moved by that any longer. If things come on TV and you're watching things and you no longer see it for the hurt, or you're no longer moved compassionately because of something that's tragic, you're getting to a place where apathy is starting to rule a little bit more in your life and in your heart than you realize. So you have to be very careful about what you're taking in and the impact that it has in your life. The next one's good as it gets mentality. Actually, don't want to get involved. Thank you, Trace. Don't want to get involved. I've been in situations where things will happen. It's like, well, you know what? This really isn't my place. You know what? I'm not really going to say anything right now. You know, I just don't want this to... We say these words, do we not? To the people around us. Situation in your family. Something's going on. It's not healthy. It's not good. Yeah, you know, I'm just going to let them work it out. Maybe they need a little impact because you want to go, hey, we love each other. Let's work on this. We let this don't get involved mentality happen. It's a place that leads to apathy. The next one's good as it gets. This is as good as it's going to get. You know, it's never going to change. I guess this is what I have. So we kind of start coasting. And what happens when you coast? If you're coasting in your car, on your bike, on a skateboard, even if you've got a little downhill momentum, what will eventually happen every time you just try to coast, especially in relationships? It will stop. You will slow down and you will stall. If it's good as it gets mentality, that's what that happens. We just kind of take the foot off the gas. We stop investing anymore. Apathy takes over. And what happens to the relationship? It stops working. Why? Because we're not any longer putting anything into it. Next one, taking things for granted. You see this a lot in marriage, honestly, where apathy takes its hold because the longer you're together, the more it requires for you to put into the relationship. But the more you take it for granted, the more you don't invest into it, the more apathy actually just kind of starts to shrivel up your heart a little bit, where you're not as moved and invested. I've been in those places where that's been a choice that I've made when it comes to my relationship with Sally. And in those seasons, the relationship isn't good. Why? Because it's kind of like, I got the girl. What else do I got to do? I've shown her that, it's the story. I've told her I loved her like 20 years ago. She knows. Brothers in the house, that does not work. But we do this all the time in a lot of the relationships we have. And then apathy leads to a dark place. The last one's fear of failure. Fear of failure. We fear of putting ourselves out there because if we fail, we might get hurt, and if we don't want to get hurt, so we just kind of go, you know what, I'm just not going to try. And all those causes that I just listed, you probably could see yourself somewhere on the list, but they all center back to one central thing, and it's at the heart of every relationship, which makes them so life-giving, but this is the part that makes them so difficult along the way. They are all connected to pain. See, that's the root of all of this, personal pain that we go through. That's usually what we are trying to protect ourselves from when we get apathetic and say whatever when it comes to our relationships. I don't want to be hurt anymore. The problem is it's very the inverse. It's kind of upside down. The more we try to protect and pull back, the less our relationships will have life. When in reality, how do we navigate through? Yes, sometimes relationships are hard. Relationships are painful. And yet, when you do the right thing and not let your heart get hard, but you keep it just in a place of health and vibrancy, and it's exercised, and it's moving, and it's active, that's when God says, I will work through and guide you through the struggles, the hurts, the relationships that you've had. Because we've all been there. Disappointed, let down, ignored, burned. Those are all things that make us not want to get involved and have this attitude. See, whatever believes people are not worth the effort. When we say that attitude and then apathy comes forward, it just says, you know what? You're not worth the time and the energy and the effort that's required to put into this. And yet, what does God say about us? We didn't put the time and effort into him, and yet God goes, you are so worth it. We sang about that a minute ago when we were up here going, there is not one thing. I loved that bridge that says there's no wall that he won't kick down. There's no lie he won't tear down. There is not one thing that you can do that will make God not want to pursue you in your life. And yet we've given him every reason to kind of go, you know what, whatever. And God goes, no, I absolutely love you so crazy much in your life. I will send myself down. I will put my own life on the line so that you know that you are so worth it. And God is calling us to do the very same thing. Yes, will you get hurt along the way, but your relationships will be so much better and so much more vibrant if we don't give in to this lie that says whatever. That is not what God calls us to. He calls us to go forth and to say, I'm going to be in this. I'm going to go into this. I'm going to be wise. I'm going to be smart. I'm going to use my words in a way, but I am not going to just guard myself in such a way where I wall myself off and then my relationships suffer along the way. Because you are so worth what God has shown us, and he wants us to take that crazy step sometimes. Because we've all been there when we've chosen to step out of the hurt and the pain and what we've said with, okay, they're not worth it, but you know what? Deep down, I really do care, even though I said I don't. I'm going to put myself back out there. We've all been in that place where all of a sudden something began to change in a moment, and all of a sudden the relationship began going in a different direction. Because who changed? I did. See, when we say whatever, I'm pulling myself back, and I'm just robbing what God could do with the very thing to heal this relationship. It was about you taking the first step. And me taking the very first step along the way. And I know this is a challenge. because of the parent who let you down again and again and again, the husband or boyfriend who missed the significant moments in your life, the kids at school who never treated you as an equal or were even kind to you, the friend who always cancels or tries to keep their schedule open for the better option and you don't always fall into that category, the teacher who didn't listen, on and on it can go in our lives. And yet God is trying to challenge us to go, wait a minute, I'm not going to just shut down my heart. I'm not going to close up shop. I'm not going to just try to protect me from being hurt. We think that's what apathy does, but we truly do care. And you know where apathy always leads? The only place apathy leads is regret. We regret things that we did, that we've back in our past, that we wish we could do over again. May seem like a funny story, but last fall when I started coaching cross country, a lot of things from the past of my life kind of came swirling to the forefront. Yesterday we were at a track meet all day. But during my cross country season, I was a fairly good runner at my school, and became captain of the cross-country team my junior year and senior year, and I loved running. I ran in high school, ran in college, so there was pretty high expectations going into my senior year for me to be able to go to state. I had the times, not a problem, as I was going through the season, but I became kind of relentlessly excessive in my training. I was going above and beyond. I was running before school, I was running after school, I was putting in like 80, 90 miles a week, and was just trying to just push myself to the extreme. And I started having poor races just because I was overdoing it. And I started to make excuses throughout the year. Oh, I'll get better. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. I kept saying whatever, especially to my teammates who were like, man, what's going on? What's happening? I'm like, oh, it'll all work out in the end. And all of a sudden, I started doing more poorly as the season went. Now, poorly is relative in terms of all this. I was still racing well and at the front of my school, but I wasn't racing like I was capable of racing. And as we started to get towards the meet that was actually the qualifier meet to go to state, I could tell I was just mentally not there because I was getting really apathetic about what was going on. I started to tell myself, I'm a senior. Not that big of a deal. It's just running. I started to rationalize all these things in my mind, and the words started to come out to my friends. Be like, hey, let's go do this. I'm like, no, we can't. No, I'm not going to do this. It's not that big of a deal. The language reflected what was going on in my heart, and I began to shut down inside because I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to kind of put myself out there and to succeed. I have to tell you, it's really crazy, but one of the regrets I have in my life is that race that happened, I made a decision right in the middle of the race. You know what? I'm not going to make it. I easily could have qualified to go on to state as a senior. I look back on it and I go, man, I said whatever. And it's a regret that I look back on now and I'm like, gosh, I wish I had that as a do-over. I was pretty cruel to some friends along the way, some people on my team. They expected some leadership from me, and I wasn't able to demonstrate it in any way. And that moment reminded me of other times throughout my life when I get into this place where I go, you know what? Some of my biggest regrets that I look back on is when I was in a place where my heart was hard. Why? Because I was sort of apathetic towards the people in my life. I wasn't thinking about what was going on other than, you've hurt me, you haven't done what I think I need in this moment, and so I'm just going to shut down along the way. I imagine if you look back on some of the regrets that you have, especially the relational regrets that are in our lives, you probably could trace it to go, you know what, there's a little bit of apathy that I brought. I stopped putting into the relationship. I just started saying whatever along the way. And if that's really at the root, then we've got to discover, how do we get to that place where there's this regret about how I treated my spouse, there's regret about how I've treated and interacted with my sister, with a coworker, with a parent. How do I deal with this in my life? Really, what's the cure to this apathy that comes out in our lives so much, because if our hearts are hard and it takes something that our verse talked about, this compassionate persistence that we take to move in our hearts, the very thing that cures our apathy is actually love. Now, you probably were thinking for like the opposite of apathy. When you thought about, what do we do different? Well, I need to find some passion again. I just need to be able to be like, oh, I'm excited for what's coming. That's the opposite of indifference. That's not really true when you think about it. Love is really the right antidote. There's actually a famous writer that many of us probably read when we were back in school, Elie Wiesel, who is a Holocaust writer, who had this incredible quote of somebody who went through one of the most horrific things in life. He said this about the ability for the opposite of what love is. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. That speaks to the very heart of what we're talking about. The opposite of indifference really is the love that we need to bring to the situations that we're talking about. Now, I'm not talking about feelings and like you have them. No, I'm talking about action. I'm talking about intentionality. I'm talking about being on purpose with the choices that we make with the people in our lives that maybe have hurt us the most. How do I make sure that I am actively loving them? Because if I'm loving, really that means I'm growing, I'm changing. My heart is in a place where I'm able to say, okay, God, I need your help. And this is where God comes in such a powerful way. When we say, God, you're in control, I'm trusting you. In this moment, even though I know there's some risk that's coming with this, God, I need your strength to be able to say something kind right now. When in the past, I maybe just shut down and don't say anything at all. God, in this moment, when I've been hurt by this person before, how can I do something that's actually kind for them? Rather than just kind of letting the moment pass by. So this sense of how do we actually love and let this persistence of compassion in our life, like it said in Proverbs, I want to go back to that verse so that we see what it is. Patient persistence pierces. It cuts through the apathy, which means it targets our heart, which means we have to be persistently going, God, what can I do to make sure that my heart is healthy? Which means I have to exercise it in terms of how I love the people around me in my life. Because when we do that, all of a sudden, relationships change. Things begin to adjust in our lives. The way that we see people changes. Why? Because I don't see them as a hindrance. I don't see them as a burden. I don't see them as a bother. I don't see them as someone to avoid. I instead will look at it and go, you know what? How can I actually love them in this moment right now? So I've got a few things that I want to give us as we kind of wrap up, as we go through this. How do we activate love? How do we make it something that we bring out in our lives and in our hearts? And the first one is stop complaining. It got quiet, really, all of a sudden. What's one of the things that comes out in our words when we have this sense of apathy come through? We still are very vehement complainers in our lives. It's become sort of a national pastime. So we articulate to other people, let's go back 2 weeks and talk about gossip, what makes us unhappy with them. So if we stop the complaining about the people in our lives that we struggle with the most, all of a sudden, we're opening up the door for God to go, hey, you don't hate on that person right now. Don't try to show whatever attitude. You really do care in this moment. So how can you actually choose to not say the negative thing right now? That would be pretty powerful if we stopped in that way. Even though that person might anger us to death, how do we change that up? The second one is try something new. I don't know about you, but sometimes we get into ruts pretty easily with the relationships that we have. And we keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, but it doesn't work. We know that as another word, insanity. And yet we keep doing that. We keep ignoring, we keep just being short, we keep just trying to protect. And in reality, God's going, wait a minute, I've called you to do something new. Call on me. Go to Him and say, God, what's a new way to approach this? Because when you try something new, guess what God does? Something new. He changes things up. He mixes it up. We know this in other parts of our lives. When we've created a new habit, we've created a new kind of path that we go down, all of a sudden life looks different. It's not as difficult. It's hard sometimes, but we get through it, and you're like, wow, I wish I would have done that so many years ago. And God's telling us, in those places where it is hard, I want you to do that very same thing right there. When you feel the apathy closing in around you, try something different. And it often begins with the way we speak about the people in our lives. And the last one is simple, but how do you keep a tender heart? Sometimes it's serving. Tell you, if we ever have a chance, and Thrive is going to have some missions trips that we're going to get planned out in the future again. You go on a trip, it is hard to not have a compassionate heart when you get out of what we go through in our world and you see what other people don't have and yet have incredible joy. It is hard to not just have compassion for people. So what do you do in your life that actually keeps that compassion cultivated in you? What keeps your heart moldable and changeable? Coming to Thrive, part of when we go to the Bible and we read it, and we're going to talk about this in the next few weeks, literally is we've got to break that ground up sometimes to make sure in our hearts that it just stays fresh and it's easy. Because as we know, right now the ground's easy, it's wet and it's easy, but come summertime, that ground is hard as a rock, and sometimes it's hard to break up, and it takes a lot of work, which is why being in the Word of God, coming to Thrive on Sundays, helps just keep that compassion and that tenderness just active inside of us. What do you need to do to make sure that your heart stays tender and open to the people around you? Because that's what God has done for us. So I'm going to have you bow your heads if you would. If you struggle right now, and I just want you to actually put a hand up in a moment. If you struggle and say, I have a problem with some apathy towards people in my life, would you just go ahead and put your hand up? Yeah, you can go ahead and put them down. God, in this moment, just a simple acknowledgement, going, wait a minute, that's me. God, I've given up. I'm hurting. The pain is real. But I see, God, today how actually the damaging and hurtful that this apathy is to my own life. And God, the cure that's necessary is to go, how can I love these very people? God, wisely. Not putting ourselves in situations where we get harmed again, but God, we can still love in ways, especially towards people that we've just given up on. God, there are ways we can love and show your compassion. What you have shown to us through Jesus on the cross, coming to this earth, God, is the perfect example of a group of people here on earth that didn't deserve that love, and yet you gave it freely, actively anyway. God, may we be able in our own lives to be able to call on you and say, Jesus, I need you in my life. More than anything, God, I want you to control the words that I say, but God, you need to have control over my heart, because that's the place that everything springs out of my life. And if I guard it and I'm protective of it and I'm mindful of what's going on, God, in that moment, when I need it the most and I have the desire to pull back, God, that's when you will invite me and challenge me to step forward, to engage with the people in our lives. So God, would you help us to not throw shade, but would you instead help us to offer life to the people around us by the words that come out of a heart that is fully given over to your control and to your ways. In your name we pray. Amen.